Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and today I'm reviewing Dissident Gardens by the man my edition calls Jonathan Lethem Jonathan.
Mario Maria Mario.
Lethem in recent years has truly become one of my very favorite writers. I've talked about him extensively in recent videos, and one of the things I love the most about his works, about his bibliography, his oeuvre, is how diverse it is. How much he is able to try his hand at different styles of books, from his early science fiction slash detective, hard-boiled detective novels, to his more straight-up quirky science fictional works, As She Climbed Across the Table, Amnesia Moon. There's really a little bit of a controversy there because I'm talking about early works, but those books were written in a little bit of a complicated order. Amnesia Moon, if I understand it correctly, was written before the others, even though it was published later. There's an article Lethem himself has written on the whole topic of the first novel as very much of a myth. There's a link to that article in the description box. He has written novels about youth, the kind that English undergraduates would call Bildungsroman, and be wrong, because I'm petty about genres, and he has written multi-genre works on New York, probably, maybe, possibly, who knows, his best works. And he has written novels on Brooklyn, he has written quintessentially Manhattan novels, and Dissident Gardens is a Queens novel. It's very much part of that grand New York trilogy Lethem has been writing together with Chronic City and with The Fortress of Solitude. But Dissident Gardens is also very different from those two novels, and it is also quite different from the rest of Lethem's oeuvre, at least from the part I have read. I still have to read Gambler's Anatomy and maybe one other novel. The point is that this is a straight-up historical novel, in ways that no other Lethem's novel has been so far. Sure, Fortress of Solitude leans towards some elements of the historical novel, especially in the way it discusses the way gentrification changed the landscape, both literal and social, in Brooklyn between the 70s and the 80s and later into the 90s. But the focus of that book, I think, was not historical, not necessarily, at least, whereas Dissident Gardens definitely is a historical novel that focuses, most notably, on the history of communism in the United States. The Communist Party, sure, but much more significantly beyond that, the ideal of communism as it lived inside the hearts and minds of different generations of Americans. The ideal, very abstract, possibly not existent at all because it's so abstract, but possibly also very concrete, which a character late into the novel describes as people coming together to endure the world. I'm paraphrasing. Some months ago I wrote a fan letter to Lethem, and it was very sweet, and he said that he was happy that his books translated to Italy and to Italian culture and could be appreciated by Italian readers such as me. And I think that is the case, but I also think that some of Lethem's books translate more than others, better than others, and some require you to have a certain knowledge of American culture, of the peculiar dynamics of New York as a city, of the peculiar dynamics of American politics and history in order to be fully appreciated. Dissident Gardens definitely is possibly the toughest book to crack by non-American audiences. Actually, the story and the plot and the life of the characters, you're going to be able to appreciate them no matter where you're from, but the whole implications of communism in America, those ones are a little bit more cryptic and problematic, because, most notably, because communism in America means something very different from what it means, say, in Italy, and I think that it means something different entirely from what it means to other parts of Europe, to other parts of the world. I remember reading the review of an Italian fan of Jonathan Lethem saying that his book, The Fortress of Solitude, had to be read with Google close at hand, in order, of course, to research the so many cultural references Lethem scatters all over his books. That guy, that reviewer, was talking specifically about Fortress of Solitude's references to pop culture and to popular music in particular, and that is probably the case also also with Dissident Gardens, even beyond its multiple references to music, folk music, pop music of the 60s, 70s, also because of its historical references. But hey, I don't want to scare you away if you don't have a PhD in American history, because, as mentioned, even if you know absolutely nothing about American culture and the history of communism and socialism in America, you can still appreciate so much of this book, because don't mistake it as a cold history treatise or a book on politics or philosophy. This is very much a novel about characters, which means a great novel, which means an actual novel. And Lethem gives you some beautiful insight into the minds of these characters. You can, even if you don't know much about communism, you can take this book to be a history of disappointment, a history of botched expectations in America. It would work all the same. And of course, if you're interested in the topic, if you're interested in exploring the history of social rights movement or civil rights movements or protest movements in general in the US, this works actually as a great introduction. When it comes to the way it explores the stories of these characters, it portrays the lives of these people living throughout about 7 decades, more or less, of US history, although the book mostly focuses on the 60s and especially 70s. The book uses that very old strategy that was made popular. The book that comes to mind is The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen, but you see it used all over history. That narrative strategy where you have a cast of characters, very colorful, very interesting, very peculiar, related to each other. Here, also in literal terms, they form a bizarre extended family, these characters, and each chapter in the novel focuses specifically on a specific scene, on a peculiar moment in the life of one of these characters. And by putting together all these different pieces of the puzzle, by putting together the episode where Miriam is going to attend that quiz on TV, that game show in the 70s, and that episode from her mother's early marriage, that episode where her stepbrother discovers his nature, and by putting together all of these pieces of the puzzle, you can reconstruct the story of all of these people throughout all of these decades. There is the inevitable gray area, because it's not like you follow a single person throughout all this time, but it's a fascinating way and stimulating very much of experiencing such an important narrative, and it allows the book to be less than 1,200 pages and to still convey a story with such an epic scope. The other great peculiarity of Dissident Gardens, the reason why I think it is quite different from the rest of Lethem's bibliography and Hoover, is that Dissident Gardens, in the way it is written, is peculiar. In a way, it is much more accessible than many of his other books. If you were interested in this topic, if you were looking for a good historical novel set in the Queens of the 60s or 70s, in the America of that time, if you were looking for a historical novel dealing with protest movements in America, I would recommend this book in a heartbeat, no doubt at all. Whereas with books such as Fortress of Solitude, Chronic City, Lethem science fiction novels, I would still recommend them because they are amazing novels, among my very favorite, but I would always put an asterisk there, because I think, because of Lethem's style, which tends sometimes to be cryptic, it can be a little bit challenging at times, sometimes plays tricks with the reader, very often aims for a feeling of slight disorientation and discombobulation. That style, that prose, those books may not necessarily be for every reader. Whereas Dissident Gardens is much more enjoyable, is what I want to say. It is much easier to access. And yet, it is also, at times, almost badly written. You get the occasional 5-word phrase in this book with 3 adverbs in it. You get the occasional awkward way of phrasing. You get the occasional bizarre verbal structure that makes its sentence cumbersome. And I love that, I truly do. Take what I'm going to say with a pinch of salt. Take this entire stylistic note cautiously, because in order to expand on it I would need to reread the whole of Lethem's Hoover, so let's keep this between the two of us. But Lethem's other books, by comparison, their writing feels very sleek. Every word is well calibrated there, every word counts, whereas Dissident Gardens feels much grittier to me, and these occasional awkward phrases make the beautiful reflections on characters, on history that surround these phrases and that are built with these phrases shine even more. I am a sucker for that type of occasionally awkward writing. I grew up reading H.P. Lovecraft. Certainly I look forward impatiently to the sight of that great silver key. And I love Dissident Garden for this. If anything, it's the very sleek, very perfect style of people such as Alice Munro, Raymond Carver that I don't quite stand. To me, the occasional bad sentence in Dissident Gardens feels like those early thrash metal records, especially from Germany, where sometimes you can clearly, and they're studio records, not live recordings, and you can clearly hear that the drummer is like 10 seconds behind the guitar, that they are not in sync at all, and that lends some veracity to the experience. You can perceive the human behind the artifact, and I love that. I truly do. The way I imagine it was that Lethem's editor was taking a bite of their sandwich and missed the double adverb, and so we have that beauty in here. Do I recommend the novel? I absolutely do if you're a Lethem fan. I absolutely do if you're looking for an historical novel on the history of protest, as mentioned, on the history of the counterculture in the 60s and 70s in America. I do have that suspicion, and I'd like to hear your opinion on it, that this may be Lethem's equivalent of what Telegraph Avenue is for Michael Chabon, another writer I like a lot, which means that it's a novel I personally like very much, but that many people, especially people who are not necessarily a fan of the writer per se, but just read that one single book, couldn't enjoy to the fullest. But hey, I let you guys tell me about that. Personally, I enjoyed Dissident Gardens immensely. I love the experience, and I'm looking forward to reading what you thought about the novel. If you've read it, if you're planning on reading it, let me know in the comments, and thank you as always for watching. In a second I'll put links on the screen to other reviews of Lethem's novels I filmed, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.